Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting for Monday, March 13th, 2017. My name is Mark Farrell. I'll be chairing this committee. I am joined by our committee vice chair, Supervisor Aaron Peskin, as well as Supervisor Katie Tang. Want to thank Erica Major, our clerk of the committee today, as well as Adrian Starks and Jim Smith from SFGTV for covering the meeting. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of a file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the March 21st Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Okay, thank you very much. While we wait for some paper to be delivered to committee, we're going to skip over item number 1 for the moment, and we'll move on to item number 2. With that, Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 2?
Yes, item number 2 is an ordinance amending the Transportation and Public Work Codes to establish a violation for stationless bicycle share program bikes that are left parked, standing, or unattended without a permit for the location. Authorize Public Works to take enforcement action to abate or remove these bikes and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you very much. This item was sponsored by Supervisor Peskin, so I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, and thank you for your early support for this legislation and for your co-sponsorship. As we mentioned at the press conference, this is actually the first time that the city of San Francisco is getting out in front of one of these technologies, and rather than asking for forgiveness or permission later, we figured that we should take the appropriate steps to regulate this industry in the best interests of the public. I particularly want to thank the team at the SFMTA as well as Public Works, the mayor's office who has been involved, and the city attorney's office to come together to create a public realm permitting and enforcement scheme to reflect the changing transit landscape and reflect our desire to make sure that this is done appropriately. And I want to be clear, I think we all fully support bike sharing and a robust regional solution to our traffic congestion. But we also want to make sure that this is done in a way that does not become a nuisance on the sidewalks of San Francisco. And to that end, I have before the committee this ordinance amending Division 1 of the Transportation Code to establish regulations with regard to stationless bicycle sharing programs. And I would like to note that Division 2, which is within the sole and absolute authority of the SFMTA, is going to be before the SFMTA Commission later this month on the 21st. I'd like to bring up Jamie Parks from the SFMTA Sustainable Streets Division to give a brief overview of the MTA's permitting program currently and what you guys envision for a program update.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, and thank you, committee members. Jamie Parks with the SFMTA and generally oversee the city's bicycle program. And I'm excited to be here today to present this proposed ordinance to amend Division 1 of the Transportation Code to address stationless bike share programs. And combined with the accompanying Division 2 legislation that Supervisor Peskin just mentioned that will be heard by the MTA board on March 21st, we feel that these two pieces of legislation are really strong and will make sure that stationless bike sharing is regulated in a manner that's consistent with how we already treat station-based bike sharing and also in a manner that promotes public health and safety. So we appreciate working closely with Supervisor Peskin's office to develop this combined Division 1 and Division 2 Transportation Code package that's been coordinated. So I want to take a couple of minutes to provide an overview of bike sharing as it exists in San Francisco today and describe the emerging trends in stationless bike sharing, and then describe how the legislation that you're hearing today, as well as the legislation that the MTA board will hear next week, fits into that overall framework. So first, some background on bike sharing. San Francisco already has a successful station-based bike share program. Bay Area Bike Share launched in 2013 with approximately 350 bicycles at 35 stations in San Francisco. In 2015, San Francisco worked with regional partners at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, or MTC, to form an agreement with Motivate, who already is the operator of the Bay Area Bike Share system, to privately fund a massive expansion of that system. So the resulting expansion of the station-based bike share system will have around 7,000 bikes throughout the Bay Area, with a tenfold expansion in San Francisco alone. In 2016, Motivate announced a financial partnership with Ford Motor Company, and we're really excited to be able to say that expansion is already underway. We've got 8 new stations already in the ground as part of the expansion. We've issued permits for over 50 additional stations, and new equipment has been ordered that we'll start seeing on the ground over this summer. So that expansion is well underway, and it's very exciting to see. At the same time that our station-based program is taking shape, the concept of stationless bike sharing is continuing to evolve and emerge as a bike share model. So what is stationless bike sharing? For people that don't know, because it's relatively new, essentially it's bike share bikes that don't need a dock. So the bikes themselves have GPS, they have fair payment, they have internal locking mechanisms so that they can be left anywhere, which is freeing, but by being able to be left anywhere, they can be left at a bike rack, leaned against a tree, or just simply in the middle of a sidewalk. And so some stationless systems, such as Portland, Oregon, still offer docks as a way to organize and regulate the use of the public right-of-way with stationless bike share bikes, while other systems, particularly several emerging Chinese companies, forego docks altogether, and the bikes are simply placed wherever users choose to place them. I think Blue Gogo is the best known of these right now, but really there are half a dozen or more competitors out there. And if there are only one potential stationless bike share operator, I think as an agency, we'd approach this very differently. But knowing the growing interest in stationless bike share, we really wanted to get out in front of it, as the supervisor mentioned, to ensure that it's really well regulated. And that means treating it consistently with how we already treat station-based bike sharing, and which is already outlined in the Transportation Code. And it also means regulating stationless bike share in a way that promotes public health and safety. In terms of the legislation itself, the Division 1 legislation before you today makes it a violation to operate stationless bike sharing without a permit, and essentially treats unauthorized stationless bike share bikes like any other unauthorized item in the public right-of-way to be collected and disposed of by Public Works. The primary purpose of the accompanying Division 2 legislation, which will be heard next Tuesday by the MTA board and which will be made fully publicly available later this week, is to actually establish the stationless bike share permit itself and establish the conditions associated with receiving this permit. So, while the full details will be discussed at the MTA board, in broad outline, the permit requirements really are trying to look at legislation that ensure that any stationless bike share system promotes public health and safety. And there's a lot of details that goes into that, but 2 major themes that we really put a lot of thought into in developing the legislation is first, equity. We want to make sure that the bikes are available across a wide geography of San Francisco that includes disadvantaged communities and not simply the core of San Francisco. And that also that memberships are affordable to people with low income, so that the system truly is equitable and accessible to everyone. And the second major theme is maintaining the public right-of-way in a way that doesn't allow stationless bike share bikes to be a nuisance, whether they're blocking paths of travel on the sidewalk or simply cluttering the urban space. We want to make sure that that we are maintaining the public right-of-way, which is one of the oversight roles of MTA. And then finally, the requirements would require data sharing to make sure that operators are meeting the responsibilities that we've laid out in the requirements. So in summary, we're really excited about this legislation. It's an example of being collaborative and also being proactive. And as a result, it really helps to ensure that any use of the public right-of-way is in the public interest and that standard applies to private companies as well. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Supervisor Peskin.
I have no questions for Mr. Parks. Would like to thank him and his colleagues for their help and collaboration, and then ask Mr. Sanguinetti from the Department of Public Works to come up. Obviously, this also amends the Public Works Code and gives Mohammed and Jerry and their staff some new tools.
Thank you, Supervisor, members. So as it relates to our collaboration with the MTA, which you're very familiar with, we will be amending the Public Works Code, Article 1603, which in the past has referred to illegal dumping. What we're going to do is we're going to include bicycles for the removal of bicycles that are found to be out of compliance if they were left stranded in the middle of the right-of-way, as an example, and left in violation of governing regulations. We'll go ahead and catalog those, remove them, catalog, and then store them at the operations yard for a specified period of time where they can be claimed. Then Public Works is looking to draft a director's order that will discuss fees for that storage and for the reclamation of those bicycles.
Great. Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions?
And Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want to hear from Doug Johnson, who is available from the Municipal Transportation Commission with regard to the regional bike share network, which was previously referenced by Mr. Parks, but he is here. If you would like to hear from him. If not, we can open it up to public comment.
I think we're okay, unless proactively you're welcome to come up and say a few words, but otherwise we will open this up to public comment, but why don't we have you come on up?
How about I'll just be your first public comment?
Perfect. All right. I tell you what, Madam Clerk, we're going to open this up to public comment. Anybody else who wants to line up for public comment, please line up on the side. Everyone will have 2 minutes, and we'll move forward. Thank you.
Afternoon, Supervisors. Doug Johnson here from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, here to speak in support of this legislation. First off, thanks to you and to the city staff for tackling this important issue. As you may know, 5 Bay Area cities, San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, Berkeley, and Emeryville, worked together to reach an agreement to expand Bay Area Bike Share tenfold in partnership with Motivate. With its sponsorship agreement, Motivate and Ford are posed to bring 7,000 bikes to the Bay Area, to these 5 cities, without diverting tens of millions of dollars in public funds to fuel the expansion. The agreement with Motivate, negotiated in good faith amongst all 5 of the cities and MTC and Motivate over the course of nearly a year, seeks to maximize public benefit. MTC appreciates all efforts San Francisco has and will take to protect the Bay Area Bike Share system expansion as it was negotiated. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Janice Lee, and I am the Advocacy Director at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. Our organization's mission is to promote the bicycle for everyday transportation, and we have over 10,000 members who believe and support this mission. Honestly, we never thought we'd be in this position to see companies competing for a chance to get more people biking in San Francisco, and yet here we are. So this is really exciting, right? With that said, we really think that this is a move in the right direction. We thank the city and the leadership from Supervisors Peskin and Farrell in introducing the legislation before us today. Initially, we expressed strong concerns and even a bit of opposition when the first stationless bike sharing company had plans of expanding their operations to San Francisco. We heard a lot of unclear reports about how many bikes that there were and what their plans were, and the fact that it sounded like they were not really working through the city. We really want to make sure that biking creates access to affordable and sustainable transportation, not clutter on our sidewalks that threatens safe passage on our sidewalks and other places. So again, we're really glad to see that this legislation is being introduced, and we think that it provides the right framework for these companies to be able to engage with city officials, and really gives all bike sharing companies what the right framework is for what these programs should look like in San Francisco to make sure that this really does promote the bicycle for everyday transportation. So thank you, and we hope that you will all move this on to the full board tomorrow.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Darcy Brown, Executive Director of San Francisco Beautiful. Since 1947, when we saved the iconic cable cars from demolition, San Francisco Beautiful has been the only organization to advocate for our city's civic beauty and has been instrumental in creating and delivering community-centered artistic benefit while enhancing our unique and increasingly threatened neighborhood character. I am before you today in support of the ordinance to regulate the growing concern of our members regarding dockless bike share. San Francisco Beautiful is not opposed to bike share, but we do want regulated and balanced bike share to avoid our streets and neighborhoods from becoming indiscriminate dumping grounds for piles of unregulated bikes. As we have learned, many of these companies have policies which adopt the philosophy of better to demand forgiveness than ask for permission. San Francisco has suffered the consequences of rogue companies thumbing their noses at our local laws and regulations and ignoring the valid concern of our public trustees. These companies have no interest in the unique needs of our neighborhoods or the participation of neighborhood groups, preferring to use the one-size-fits-all approach. Bike share is a growing and important part of our city's urban mobility. It should be planned, as should all lucrative corporate schemes that advertise a public benefit in collaboration with government, civic organizations, and the citizens it's intended to serve. It should be regulated to promote the specific needs and welfare of San Franciscans and not encroach upon the livability of our city. Please let's not allow these companies to turn the public realm into their own private parking lot. Let's not add another layer of obstacles to our increasingly crowded streets and litter our parks and lovely neighborhoods with thousands of cheap bikes that leave the city to respond to complaints and our citizens holding the cleanup bill.
Thanks very much.
You.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon. I'm Jay Wolder. I'm the president and CEO of Motivate. Motivate is a bike share leader, partnering with governments and brands in some of the largest cities in the world. As has been discussed, we're currently planning the rollout of Ford Go Bike in cooperation with 5 Bay Area cities, the MTA, and the MTC. By way of background, before I joined this company, I helped run 3 of the world's largest transit systems in New York, London, and Hong Kong. And improving urban mobility has been my life's work. It's one of the reasons why I joined Motivate. It's the reason why I'm grateful to be here with you today. There's an old proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Motivate believes in going far, and it's the reason that we've undertaken a multi-year collaborative effort that will culminate with San Francisco having the most advanced, safe, and robust bike share system of any city in the world. I want to briefly talk about what we've been doing and where we're going with bike share in San Francisco. We've spent the past 2 years working hand in hand with the city to create a bike share system that this region deserves, one that provides a high-quality, flexible, on-demand transportation option that will complement the existing transit network. Over the past year and a half, Motivate has held over 200 meetings with community leaders and 27 citizen town halls. The input of the community has been integral to shaping what will soon be the second largest bike share program in the nation. The reason we're here today is because some operators want to disrupt that approach. They have a mentality that it's better to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. Now, that's not innovation. It's just greed. The bill before the committee today provides a framework for permitting bike share programs and enforcing the rules so that everyone, including us, will be forced to serve the interests of
Thanks.
not just investors.
Thanks very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Arielle Fleischer, and I am a Transportation Policy Associate with SPUR. SPUR is a nonprofit organization that promotes good planning and good government in the Bay Area through research, education, and advocacy. We would like to express our support for the legislation sponsored by Supervisor Peskin to regulate San Francisco's bike share operators. SPUR believes that bike share is an important and necessary part of our city's transportation ecosystem, but we need bike share that is planned, that is regulated, and that is accountable to the city and stakeholders. Several bike share startups are offering a stationless bike share system or seeking to enter the bike share market in San Francisco. These bikes could be stored unattended for long period of times on our sidewalks, in our parks, and on our streets. There's a real concern of bikes littering public spaces, becoming an eyesore on our streets, and impacting safe passage. A robust, integrated, technologically advanced bike share system is fundamental to San Francisco's transportation future. Achieving this goal will require regulation and working in partnership with the city so that we don't end up with the unintended negative consequences that ultimately could undermine the very important goal of expanding bike share. The city needs to take proactive measures to ensure that all bike share operators abide by a standard set of rules and principles consistent with the larger mobility goals of the Bay Area. We are encouraged by the collaborative process undertaken by Motivate. They work with stakeholders to ensure an equitable bike share infrastructure that protects the safety of riders and promotes ridership. We believe the legislation now under consideration is consistent with these aims, and we support moving it to the full board. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to speak in public comment? All right, seeing none, public comment is now closed. Supervisor Peskin.
Mr. Chairman, before I make a motion to move this with recommendation as a committee report, I did just want to clarify, and maybe Mr. Parks can come up for just 1 second, because I know there were some concerns which I think are abundantly clear in the legislation, but I wanted to put on the record with regard to electric scooters, which, as I read this, are not covered by this legislation, and I wanted to confirm that with staff.
Yes, that is accurate. So the legislation refers specifically to bicycles, and the Transportation Code refers then to the California Vehicle Code definition of bicycle. So it only refers specifically to bicycles. It would not cover motorized scooters.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, if no other questions or comments, I'm going to want to thank everyone for coming forward here and look forward to seeing this deployed. And certainly we will continue to be vigilant in our efforts against those that seek to flaunt our laws here in the city, especially in this regard. Supervisor Peskin, you want to make a motion here?
I will move what I previously stated to send it with recommendation as a committee report for hearing tomorrow at the board.
Motion by Supervisor Peskin, second by Supervisor Tang, and we can take that without objection. Thank you, everyone. We are going to go back to our first item. So, Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 1, please?
Yes, item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to create the Affordable Housing Bonus Program to provide for development bonuses and zoning modifications for affordable housing, establish the procedures by which these programs shall be reviewed and approved, adding an application fee and exempting certain projects and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you. This item was sponsored by Supervisor Tang, so I will turn it over to her.
Thank you so much. I just want to start by saying that I know that housing, and especially affordable housing, has been a very hot topic here in San Francisco for many, many years. And I had worked on legislation previously with our planning department and community members to address this issue of affordable housing, and in particular as it relates to middle income and workforce housing. So first of all, I'll just start by thanking a couple of people who worked on this with me: Kirsten Distinger from Planning, Paolo Ikezoe, Anne-Marie Rogers, Deanna Keyson from my office, and Audrey Pearson, who's here with us from the City Attorney's Office. So I just want to quickly, as much as I can, recap what has gone on since the introduction of this item and some of the actions that we've taken. So again, just to bring it back to why I even introduced this legislation in the first place, as you all know, our city really does not invest any dollars into housing that support our middle income and our workforce households and families here. The vast majority, if not more than 90% of our city's public dollars go towards supporting low and very low income households, which is absolutely necessary. But I do think that we are missing serving a hugely important segment of our population here that is struggling to remain here in San Francisco. And so that is how we came up with a local program to incentivize the development of 30% affordable housing in market rate projects by offering certain incentives such as additional 20 feet of height and some other zoning incentives. So the goal of this program overall is to develop potentially 5,000 permanently affordable units over the course of 20 years, and that's just the affordable side alone. We also know that given the existing state density bonus law that has been in existence since the 1970s, that is a tool that developers actually get to invoke at this very moment. We want to exceed the goals of that state law. And so what we have before us today is a program called Home SF, which is an optional program. And again, it incentivizes 30% affordable housing. It applies to buildings with 3 or more units, so RH1 and RH2 areas are excluded. Area plans are not included as part of this program. Development bonuses include 20 additional feet and some other zoning incentives if the affordability requirements are met. 40% of the new units required must be 2 or more bedrooms, and this again really to foster more family-sized housing, especially those with children. We prohibit the merging of lots that result in more than 125 feet in lot frontage in neighborhood commercial districts. We also limit projects to new construction and exclude any project that includes an addition to an existing structure. Most importantly, I'll go over the amendments that we made in June in a second, but I also want to remind everyone that this legislation does also allow developers to utilize the state density bonus law, which is required of us to do so. And of course, we will receive an evaluation and update every 5 years. Just to rewind as to what happened back in June of 2016, I had introduced a set of amendments then, which you will also see in the copy before you today, colleagues. They are also double underlined, and so this summary sheet that I have passed out to you allows you to see which amendments were adopted in June of 2016 and then which ones I'm going to be introducing today. So in June of 2016, we put in amendments so that there are no displacement of existing residential tenants and no demolition or removal or conversion of any existing residential uses. We also require any project using this Home SF program to go through a conditional use permit process, and it requires a replacement of ground floor level active uses at like size for any neighborhood commercial space that is impacted by a project using Home SF. We also wrote into the legislation as comprehensive as we could at that time information on how we can support commercial tenants that might be impacted by a project. And at that point, we included early notification to small business tenants of no less than 18 months from the relocation date. And again, this was all due to restrictions that we have at the state level regarding commercial rent control. So for today's purposes, I'm going to be introducing another set of amendments, and then further after that, I will ask the chair to continue this item to the call of the chair so that the full Home SF item will be able to sit in committee for some time for public discussion. So the amendments today that I will introduce will rename the Local Affordable Housing Bonus Program to Home SF to distinguish between the fact that we had already passed last year the 100% local affordable bonus program. And so, again, we need to distinguish the fact that now we're just focusing on the market rate program. I will also be amending the income levels for the below market rate units to ensure equal distribution of low, moderate, and middle income units. And so rental below market rate units will be offered at 3 different income levels at 55% AMI, 80% AMI, and 110% AMI. And in terms of ownership BMR units, they would be offered at 3 income levels as well, at 90% AMI, 120%, and 140%. All of these income levels mirror the AMI levels that are also in the inclusionary legislation that was sponsored by Supervisor Asha Safai. We also write into this legislation some family-friendly amenities that we encourage of our developers, the inclusion, for example, of 3 or more bedroom units, the distribution of larger units on all floors and to be adjacent to open spaces or play yards, incorporation of family-friendly amenities such as bathtubs, strollers, storage, and open space and yards. We also add a few more things to protect and to provide options for existing commercial tenants, again, as much as we possibly could, running up against the commercial rent control laws at the state level. We also have, lastly, a few technical cleanups. So, for example, we exclude the northeastern waterfront area plan south of the center line of Broadway to make that consistent with the height limits within the general plan. And also, we do make some technical changes in response to a recently adopted state law, AB 2501. So again, there's a summary sheet that I passed around. I apologize for the long summary of what has gone on. We will have definitely a more robust conversation after this legislation, after we've adopted the amendments, and we can have a more full-on policy discussion at a future land use hearing. So with that, colleagues, I'm open to any questions you might have, suggestions. I'm sure we have a lot of input here from the public as well, so I'm happy to turn over to colleagues or to public comment.
Colleagues, any questions? Supervisor Peskin.
No, first of all, I want to thank Supervisor Tang for the way you're approaching this. Obviously, when we dealt with this last year, we ended up with the 100% density bonus legislation, which in conjunction with a lot of the other things that we're doing is expanding our toolbox, whether it's the accessory dwelling unit legislation that Supervisor Farrell and I collaborated on, or actions that we've taken to make sure that short-term rentals don't gobble up existing housing stock, and a host of other things. I think it's time to have this conversation again. I also think it's important to see it in the context of a changing regulatory environment at the state level. I mean, I think many of us were surprised that this density bonus law had been on the books since 1979, and no one had availed themselves of it until very recently. And I think the fundamental concern that I and other people had was the fact that this could actually dilute the amount of inclusionary housing that we require locally. And to that end, part of that changing regulatory environment is a bill that our own Assembly member Phil Ting introduced, AB 915, in the current legislative session, which would recognize that state density bonus not undermine our local inclusionary law. And so that might change things as well. And then, of course, the conversation that's happening in the state legislature with regard to by right and whether or not that brings about other preemption issues the months ahead will show us more. And then finally, I want to reiterate some of the concerns that I expressed the last time we had this relative to ensuring that density is equitably distributed geographically through the city. And I say that through the lens of a supervisor who represents the smallest geographic district, albeit it has the same number of people crammed into a much smaller area. So I do have concerns relative to District 3, which is mostly RH3, zero lot line, or in many cases denser. So I hope to work through those issues with you over the months ahead. And then finally, I would like to point your attention to, I think, a very well thought out letter from a neighborhood organization in my district, the Middle Polk Neighborhood Association, a 3-page letter dated March 12th that is, I think, worth our consideration as it relates to soft sites, as it relates to what zoning districts and what areas may want to be removed from the market rate affordable density bonus program, or home SF, or whatever we call it. So I would point your attention to that letter and thank Mo Jamil and the Middle Polk Neighborhood Association for offering that letter without any prompting from this supervisor.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you for your comments. I really do appreciate it. And, you talk about density equity, geographically speaking, and that's actually what I am very much trying to do here. As we all know, the West Side, especially District 4 and places like District 1, we really don't see a whole lot of development. And there are benefits, I think, that come with certain types of development, especially if it's along transit and commercial corridors. Again, we don't want to touch on our strictly residential neighborhoods. And so that is certainly something we are thinking about. I have certainly seen the letter from the Middle Polk Neighborhood Association, and a lot of the feedback, we're certainly going to be taking that into consideration. But I do want to also point out that many of those elements were discussed previously as well. And I want to remind everyone that this is an optional program. The state density bonus law is still and will continue to be available unless obviously there are changes at the state law. But again, we want to make sure that we on a local level here in San Francisco have stronger affordability requirements that are in place. And we have a program that really actually reflects what we want to see here in San Francisco. I think when the first project that was approved at Planning Commission through this board that utilized the state density bonus law, I heard from many planning commissioners that, hey, why don't we have our own local density bonus program? Where has that been? And frankly, we had been working on it for a long time, but there are many reasons, both political and policy-wise, where it has been stalled. And so I'm really hoping that if we really truly do stand for wanting to provide for our middle and our workforce families, that this, I think, is a great solution, especially as we put in stronger protections last summer, so that no existing residential units or tenants are going to be evicted or any of those units going to be demolished. So with that said, at this moment, I'm going to just call up some public comment cards, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you. So we have Paul Slade, Norman DePude, I'm sorry if I can't read the handwriting here, Kevin Burke, Christy Wong, Eileen Boken, Mo Jamil, and Dick Morton. Please come on up.
Yeah, I'm Paul Slade. I was born in the Sunset, and now I live in Richmond, and came from a working-class family. Because of my union job, I was able to buy a home here in San Francisco many years ago. A union worker couldn't do that today. It would be impossible. I'm a retired muni operator, and many of my fellow operators who were born in the city moved to the East Bay. Most of them, they said, God, I wish I could afford to live here to avoid this big commute. So I'm here because I care about the future of the city, and I think if we really want to be a diverse city, that also means economic diversity. And that's why it's so important, I think, to support Supervisor Tang's proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your service. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Mo Jamil. I'm the chair of Middle Polk Neighborhood Association, and as the supervisors mentioned, we have been following this program and offered some thoughts to it. Just wanted to say at the forefront, I think we are one of the few neighborhood groups that's actually dug into this program and is supportive of the concept of offering density incentives in exchange for greater levels of affordable housing. And I think that this board and the city did a great job last year by passing the 100% affordable density program, which has been utilized by a couple projects so far, and that's exciting. The question is, do we want to take such large action in more gradual or piecemeal steps? And we would argue that that would be the wisest course. Put simply, adopting a program for RC districts along, for example, Van Ness Avenue, the higher density parts of the city, could be done without much controversy. I mean, if you can push 30 to 40% levels of affordability in those districts, which are already able to take on that height, that'd be great. C districts, I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with that. NC3 and NCT3. So, you know, if we're going to do a Geary BRT, it probably makes sense to do some work there. But when we start talking about the NCDs, I think we have to be very careful to limit to larger sites because I'll just give you the example of Polk Street. Many of these small one-story commercial buildings are owned by multi-generational trusts. And once developers start combining lots, they can put something there. But you cannot replace that essence of that commercial corridor. So I urge the board to review the letter. There's some specifics in there where I think it'd be great to get a program passed that focuses on the districts that are not very controversial. And, you know, of course, if different parts of the city, particularly the west side, want to add this for their NCDs, that sounds great. But development will go where the highest return is. And that is Polk Street, Union, Chestnut, Sacramento Street, Noe Valley, the Mission. That is where the highest rate of return is.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, I just want to clarify that, again, we do prohibit the merging of lots that result in more than 125 feet in lot frontage and NCDs. Next speaker, please.
My name is Norman DePover. Why I'm coming to here is I believe in affordable housing. I had the great opportunity to have housing at the Coronet. And like I said, and for many years, for 6 years, I've been in the Coronet. Before I was in completely homeless. And like I said, everybody deserves a chance to have affordable housing. I'm also with the Institute Aging. They provide my services, but it's very important for everybody to have a chance, like I did, to have housing. And what the housing has done, I've done many things. I participated in a supervisor campaign and other things that I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't had the chance through the Coronet and the Institute of Aging and the Department of Public Health DAW program. Yeah, I'm here because, I had a chance. And like I said, I feel everybody, the whole city, every race, age, money bracket should have stands for affordable housing that is for everybody.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Dick Morton. I'm a resident of Supervisor
Dick,
Tang's.
can you grab that microphone, Dick?
Yeah. I'm live in Supervisor Tang's district. I support the proposed legislation, and I'm going to have you go back to the Wayback Machine that 1979 when the city adopted residential and neighborhood commercial zoning, which generally downzoned the city. A friend of mine, Gary Kraft, with the planning department, wrote a brief paper, and he's an economist, said that the housing costs would go up, increase rents, increase home ownership costs, and there'd be a lot of pressure on low and moderate income homes owners and people. Supervisor Tang had a series of meetings in her district and I was surprised that roughly 40% of the residents supported higher density housing on commercial zones. That just floored me. I thought it would be not in my neighborhood kind of mentality. Her recent newsletter also had a youth council out there, and if I read it correctly, the second highest priority for youth was housing. And I'm also speaking on behalf of my daughter, who cannot afford to rent in this city. I'd like to have you consider whether or not there's a way to have any expedited permit processing as part of this, whether we can evaluate how the development fees are handled, where they can be pro rata over several years, which reduce the impact, or whether a percentage of property tax from the new development could be applied to offset the development fee.
Thank you. Your time is up, but if you want to wrap up your sentence.
The last thing I'd say is I think good design is essential. And secondly, we have to pay attention to people who will oppose it because of parking, unless there is parking.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Kevin Burke. I'm a renter and I run a software consulting business. I live in District 3. I'm speaking in support of the legislation. I think people are going to want to move here. There's not that much that we can do about that. We can try to accommodate new people. We can try to accommodate our city's kids by building new projects, or we can put roadblocks up in front of them and just watch prices continue to increase. I think we should be doing what we can to increase the number of housing units in the city. We saw how effective this was in watching prices drop since 2015, at least for market rate rents. They're down about 6 or 7%, I believe. That was a large result of building a lot of new housing in the city and watching prices drop. Lower prices help everyone. Lower rents help everyone. They reduce demand for evictions. They make it cheaper for the city to build. They make it cheaper for developers to build here, and they help put money back in people's pockets, renters' pockets, and people trying to get by. I'm a small business owner myself. I would like to grow my business and hire employees, but it's really difficult. When housing here is so expensive, it just makes it a tough proposition. The more housing that we can build, the lower prices, the easier it will be to have people move here and help them get hired. In terms of your comment, Supervisor Peskin, about affordable housing being distributed equitably, I agree that that's important, but I think that we should start somewhere, and I think this is a good start. I think this is a fair proposal. Considering how difficult it is to build housing in San Francisco, it's about $400,000 per door. Plus, you have to run the gamut of CEQA lawsuits, discretionary review, multiple phases of the review process. I think if you're actually willing to run that gamut, we should reward you with a little bit more density in the process. I don't think any of the developers are making a ton of money off this, so I'd love to see it go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before the next speaker comes up, just going to call up a couple more cards. Victor Olivieri, Steve Boyle, Nick Bellani, and Angelique Mann. Please come on up.
Hi, Supervisors. Christy Wong from SPUR, Community Planning Policy Director. Thank you for the opportunity to share support for the Home SF program. I was here last year to speak in favor of the prior, under the prior name, and I would reiterate a few of those reasons for why we support it. That it's increasing the number of homes in San Francisco, both affordable and market rate, that it's going to encourage housing in the right places. And in the right places, we mean by transit, but also not just in the area plans where we have planned for housing extensively over the last 10 years, getting into some of the neighborhoods where there have been sites that have been underutilized or unused, and we think that we can use them better. And it will create a much-needed middle-income housing program that also pays attention to the needs of families. This is something that has not been addressed completely by San Francisco's housing strategy. We've done, we can always do more, but we're doing a pretty good job on the low-income side, and I think we have seen some recent success on market rate, but it is getting increasingly difficult because of our market to address market rents for the moderate and middle-income households. And then I want to say it's also a smart alternative to the state density bonus program, which doesn't take our local inclusionary levels into account or our local design and planning priorities. And so this is a great way to incentivize developers to do some of the right thing and provide more benefit that is more desired by the city to get more in return. And I guess I would just say I think that this is a fairly targeted program. It is not going to transform the city overnight. We appreciate Supervisor Tang's revisions from last year, and I think probably would argue that some of those things we agree with the original version in terms of demolition of units. There are more nuanced ways to replace units and instead of losing them. So, good. Sorry, I'm running out of time. We support the program. Take care.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Okay. Eileen Boken, District 4 resident. I'm here supporting the continuance for this item so that it can be heard after the Planning Commission action scheduled for March 23rd. This item is deja vu of the previous Affordable Housing Density Bonus Program. The previous program was based in part on Blueprint for the Sunset. It included 4 components. This legislation, version number 5, appears to add the 3 components back in. This version adds a small business protections. These protection and relocation assistance have previously been deemed inadequate by the Small Business Commission. This version has the same issues as the Affordable Housing Density Bonus Program, which are exceptions to rear yard, dwelling unit exposure, height, bulk, floor area ratio, usable open space, parking, off-street loading, and obstructions over streets and alleys. The 2 additional stories could be even more stories with setbacks. This legislation includes the urban design guidelines, which shall be applied citywide. Unfortunately, the latest version of the urban design guidelines will not be out until March 16th. If this would move forward before March 16, or it would basically approve the urban design guidelines before they're even released. So the timing of this hearing, both before March 16th and also the 23rd, the continuation dates, at least to me personally, is not clear, but these are 2 issues about the urban design guidelines on the 16th and the Planning Commission action item on March 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Victor Alveri, and I'm here to support HomeSF. There is a major gap in our housing infrastructure. The housing market in San Francisco is high cost and is forcing working people out of the city precisely when they're most vulnerable, when they're starting out their careers. Young families when they're just starting out their new lives, and veterans when they're reintegrating back into society. We need to protect these people from being priced out of the city. In fact, we need to welcome these people into San Francisco to create a sustainable community. Currently, there are no public housing programs or subsidies for moderate or middle-income households. HomeSF would alleviate some of the issues surrounding the unaffordability crisis in San Francisco by focusing precisely on the housing that is desperately needed for families making between $60,000 and $150,000 a year. When you think about it, that's not a lot of money at all if you live in the city. $60,000 a year, people working in San Francisco, living in San Francisco, these are our teachers, these are our nonprofit employees, these are the city employees. These are the people that are working for the greater good in the city, and these are the people that are just starting out. I urge you to please protect them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Nick Bolani, and I'm here to actually support this because I was talking to some friends, and one of them is a friend of mine that I've been born and raised here in San Francisco. She's been the same way. She's a single mother. She lives in a single-bedroom home. She's trying to find a 2-bedroom place for her and her daughter. Unfortunately, the prices are incredibly scary for her. She has a decent job as a CPA for a well-known law firm in the city, and she can't basically move out of a 1-bedroom with her daughter growing up, and kids, as we all know, grow. So that's where she is, and that's why this is so important. We need to find places so that families can be here, like the last speaker said, city employees. Also, my girlfriend is in the same boat. She has to live with a group of roommates just to be able to stay in the city. So to end this, and what I'm saying is to support this. So I hope you guys have a great day, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hey guys, my name is Steve Boyle. I'm an artist. I have an immersive theater company, and one of the things that binds together all of the collaborators I work with, be they actors, hip-hop artists, taiko drummers, ballet folklorico dancers across class, culture, creed, and ethnicity, is the threat of displacement. You know the story, I think. First you head off to the East Bay, then out of the Bay Area entirely. Now, San Francisco has a thriving arts ecosystem. It's core to the identity of this town, and it's an economic driver for a lot of hardworking San Franciscans and a lot of small businesses. But I'm here to tell you that it is at genuine risk and peril because of the human tragedy of our housing crisis, and that's why I enthusiastically support Home SF and its promise to build more affordable housing without displacing existing tenants. It seems to me that the costs of height, whether they are shadows or blocked views or architectural inconsistency, pale in comparison to the human needs of a place to live, the ability to lay down roots in your community, and the ability to start a family. That's why I support Home SF, and I hope that you will too. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. And if anyone else would like to comment on item 1, please comment up.
Good afternoon. My name is Angelique Mahan, Supervisor Pest, and it's an honor to see you again. It's been a long time. Supervisor Tang, great to see you as well. Having said that, my name is Angelique Mahan. I am a native San Franciscan. I've sat on several community boards. I was on a coalition of San Francisco neighborhoods. Eileen Buck, and I don't know where she's at. Associated District Improvement Association, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One thing we have in common with those things that most of the people that I sat on those boards with, I went to Mercy High School. I had a class of 179 people. 6 of them still live in the city, so we have been displaced. I had the opportunity to work at Stonestown for a week, and it was the first time in over 15 years that I saw people that I actually went to school with. Some of them were city employees. In fact, most of them were firefighters, cops. Most of them live in Marin. Most of them live in the East Bay, so I am with a little bit of trepidation, but still very excited that Supervisor Tang has stepped forward and actually created some sort of proposal that actually addresses workforce housing. I applaud the city's effort on trying to work with those, the least of us. We seem the most of our housing has been addressed towards people that were the meek among us, and that is definitely honorable. But things that are lost in this process are people like me who grew up here, and if I did not inherit my home from my mother, which, believe it or not, I'm scoffed at because that happened, I would not be able to afford to live here. I don't make $60,000, and I would not be able to afford to live here. So I think it's important that when we have our policies in place, I think we really need to take these things into account, not just for the artists, which is very important, the people that have come here, but people who actually have lived here, who have experienced the San Francisco community and deserve the right to be able to raise multi-generational people and have their kids have the experience to live here just as much as anybody who comes here. So I thank you for your time. Supervisor Farrell, I'm sorry I didn't address you as well. It's good to see you as well. And I definitely hope you take this important legislation into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Laura Clark, YIMBY Action. And I just want to say it's time. It's past time. It's long past time. We need housing, and we especially need it on our transit corridors, especially out in the west side. I think Katie Tang hit it right on the head. The west side and the south side has consistently not done the development that has been needed in this city. And it is time for everyone to take their share and to welcome more families into these communities. We can build dense, vibrant, diverse communities out in our outlying neighborhoods. We can enrich those communities. We can have workforce housing. We can have families come back to San Francisco because they are leaving right now. We are losing those families every day. The best time to build a house was yesterday. The second best time is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Corey Smith on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity. As mentioned by a number of previous speakers, we know that San Francisco has the lowest percentage of children of any major metropolitan city in the United States. This legislation will specifically help families by requiring 40% of all units to be family-friendly. And if we are truthful about having a goal of keeping families in this city, we need to be passing Home SF as soon as possible. We also know that we've seen a declining middle class. About 30 years ago, the middle class made up about 50% of San Francisco's population, and today that's closer to 30%. Unfortunately, that's been almost entirely replaced by high-income earners. By requiring 30% subsidized affordable housing on site for EMTs, for firefighters, for teachers, for electricians, for construction workers, and for all the other folks that make San Francisco a working-class city, passing Home San Francisco is critical. We can keep working folks in San Francisco if we pass Home SF. Lastly, there's been a lot of discussions around displacement, specifically in the Mission District. Because this legislation excludes area plans, we know that passing Home San Francisco and alleviating the housing pressure on the Mission will reduce displacement of low and middle income tenants in the Mission District. For families, for working people, and for the city's most vulnerable, we look forward to passing this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Donald Dissop here, resident of the City of San Francisco. This particular legislation is not perfect. However, it's a great solid start. I'm not enthusiastically pro-developer, but just like corporate farmers over in the Central Valley, they're a necessary evil. We need to worry less about the greed of developers and more about housing human beings and holding the rest of the city accountable, because we can't just shove all our housing needs onto District 6, onto District 9, and District 10. This particular piece of legislation is great to provide equity and fairness to all the citizens of San Francisco and hold all the districts of San Francisco accountable for building more homes for families and for young people. We can't simply keep pushing out young people and the homelessness and those who are unable to afford more than people that make more than $20,000 a year, because most of the BMR units we are creating today are for those folks that only make about between $5,000 a year to $20,000 a year. We have a working class group of folks, and they need our help getting a leg up here in the city of San Francisco. And the housing crisis is a regional crisis, and the other cities around us look upon San Francisco as an example. So if we can work out our small nuances and differences and work together with this housing crisis, it helps the rest of the region to encourage them to build more and take pressure off the whole city, including the Mission, from displacement and evictions. Thank you. Please support Home SF.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please, and anyone else, please line on up.
Good afternoon. Pat Valentino. I'm here in my personal capacity and as an affordable housing attorney. I'm involved with the South Beach Mission Bay Business Association, Western Soma Voice, and president of the Board of Community Housing Partnership. I work on a lot of housing issues, both at work and in community support. I do support this Home SF program, this legislation. With the amendments, I guess all the comments have been pretty much made that I was going to make, except for one. I think it's important that as far as where geographic placement, I know there's concern about different neighborhoods carrying their share of affordable housing and especially middle-income housing. I think it's important to let, in part, the economics decide, not be afraid of letting economics decide where development takes place. That means it can happen. I'd rather see places that are already existing dense do take on more housing if necessary, so that that housing gets built, as opposed to it not getting done in some of the outer neighborhoods. Yes, it's important to enhance the transit corridors, but not at the cost of the project not getting done at all. Having worked with real estate developers and real estate investors over a 20-some-odd year period, sometimes the bottom line doesn't have as much of an analysis as to the social dynamics, which is very unfortunate. But I think at this point, the production of middle-income units is extremely important. So my comment is just to let's allow for permission for middle-income units to be built along possibly already existing areas instead of just favoring or trying to force equal distribution. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to comment? Okay, seeing none, then we will close public comment.
Public comments now closed. Supervisor
Thank you
Tang.
very much. Thank you to everyone who came out and provided your feedback. And I just want to remind everyone that last year, or even the year before that, actually our office and also planning department staff had gone around to 10 districts in the city, sometimes more than once, to actually do a listening tour about what everyone's feedback was on this legislation. So all the amendments you see, we really tried hard to listen. It's not perfect, but we tried everything we could to, at least at this point, incorporate those comments. And it wasn't 11 districts only because one of the districts wanted to combine their meeting with another one. I also want to remind everyone that this is an optional program. So as Supervisor Peskin even mentioned in his comments, this is just one of many other tools, other programs out there, but we certainly don't have anything to support our middle and workforce housing units here in San Francisco. So that's what I'm here to achieve. And at this time, then, I have circulated the summary sheet as well as the actual legislation with the amendments. And I'd like to ask the committee members to entertain a motion to adopt the amendments, and then we'll continue this item to the call of the chair.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Tang, and just want to personally thank Supervisor Tang for all of her advocacy and leadership on this effort. I know it's been a long time in coming, and thank you for continuing to work, and it was mentioned before, your approach as well. Supervisor Peskin, okay for a second? Okay, we have a motion by Supervisor Tang, a second by Supervisor Peskin, and we can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, would you call item number 3, please?
Item number 3 is a resolution urging the California State Legislature and Governor to pass Assembly Bill 342 that authorizes a 5-year pilot of automated speed enforcement technology in San Francisco and San Jose.
Okay, thank you very much. We have our colleague Supervisor Yee, who's a sponsor of this item, and is going to come wow us in a minute with his words. Okay, Supervisor Yee, welcome. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Farrell. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Colleagues, last month I introduced a resolution urging the state legislators and the governor to pass AB 342. And hopefully this is not a surprise to anybody, because this is something that we talked about for several years now, ever since we've adopted the policy of Vision Zero in 2014. And in fact, last year, in January, the Board of Supervisors, we announced passed a resolution supporting state legislation to authorize an automated speed enforcement program. And why did we do that? Because that particular item is something that we can't do at the local jurisdiction since the state controls it. So without having some support from state legislation to allow us to do this, we couldn't really move forward. And now we have this bill that would allow this as a pilot project for 2 cities, in San Francisco and in San Jose. And this is authored by our Assembly Member Chu's office. And I want to say that this is something that has been important to us ever since we adopted it, Vision Zero, because we know that, number one, speed is the main ingredient that actually causes the fatalities versus injuries. And depending how fast you're going to be moving, it's something that we know as a fact that indeed that if you're going, let's say, 20 miles per hour and you collide into a pedestrian, that there's probably a 90% chance that you'll survive. But if you're going at 40 miles per hour the chances goes down to 20%. So we know this is a major, major, major factor. And from other jurisdictions, we've learned that once they implemented such a program where they have automated speed enforcement capacity, that actually the fatalities were reduced enormously. There's actually 142 jurisdictions in the United States that has this capacity, and a few places just to indicate the effectiveness of this. That, for instance, in Washington D.C., they found that once they implemented the program, there was 70% reduction in fatalities. And in New York City, where I heard about it in the first place, reported that the violations dropped by 59% in terms of speeding in the first 4-month period. So allowing the automated speed enforcement is common sense, and as a survivor of a near-fatal collision, I'm committed to San Francisco being a Vision Zero city, and more than just words, but in action. So are we alone in supporting this? Well, so what we have now is the mayor of not only San Francisco, Mayor Lee, but the mayor of San Jose, our police, Chief Scott, the Department of Public Health, staff at the Zuckerberg General Hospital Trauma Center, San Francisco Bay Area Families for Safe Streets, Walk SF, and the Bike Coalition, and numerous neighborhood organizations who have come out, stepped forward to support this legislation. As policymakers, we must do everything in our power to stop these preventable deaths. AB 342 allows automatic or ASEs only high injury corridors where speed has been proven to be the cause of the collisions. But let's be clear, despite the overwhelming data of this technology that saves lives and the overwhelming local support, it will not be easy to win in Sacramento. There are organizations that are against it, or it seems to be against it, raising issues such as, well, is this going to take away jobs? So what is the argument here? First of all, is it really going to take away jobs? We lose one job, but we save 3 people. Come on, do the math. The reality is this. People might use that argument, but we've had, in San Francisco alone, when we implemented having cameras at the traffic lights installed to catch violators, did we reduce the number of police officers in San Francisco because of that? The answer is absolutely no. When MTA decided to put cameras on their buses to catch those that are double parked in their lanes, did we reduce the number of staff that was going to ticket, this is a MTA staff, to ticket parked vehicles? The answer is absolutely not. So to me, the argument is stupid. I don't understand why people would even use that argument to say, well, maybe I don't care about the people that die, So that's sort of my spiel for this, and you see I'm very passionate about this. I think we need to support it wholeheartedly. We need to have every one of us on board on this. As I say, it seems like it's still going to be a battle at the state. And if we could do this and get save lives in San Francisco, I think we did the right thing. So today, there's some speakers that I'd like to bring up. Is that okay, Chair Farrell?
Absolutely.
And I want to bring up Tom McGuire from the MTA and Megan Weird from DPH, who are to co-present.
Thanks so much, supervisors, for the opportunity to speak today. Again, my name is Megan Weir. I'm with the Department of Public Health. I co-chair the Vision Zero Task Force, and I'm the director of the Program on Health Equity and Sustainability. And I'm here with Tom McGuire, the director of Sustainable Streets from MTA. I also wanted to mention that we have staff from the mayor's office and Assemblymember Chu's office, as well as advocates here to also make remarks. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak regarding automated speed enforcement, which is our #1 state policy priority for Vision Zero in San Francisco. Motor vehicle collisions are a leading cause of death due to injury in the United States. They're actually on the rise. In this recent year, we've had 40,000 people killed in traffic collisions, and 10% of those people are in California. Approximately 30 people a year die in San Francisco, and this disproportionately impacts people walking and biking, our seniors, as well as our low-income communities and communities of color. We adopted Vision Zero as a city in 2014, and core to Vision Zero is a framework that really shifts kind of traditional traffic safety approaches from focusing on individual behavior to focusing on a safe system. So we know that it's an imperfect world and people are going to make mistakes, but when you make a mistake, the consequence should not be death. Vision Zero originated in Sweden, and core to Vision Zero is reducing speeding. And that's why, again, this policy is so important to our efforts to really eliminate deaths on our streets. As a part of Vision Zero, we've been really collaborating with trauma surgeons at Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital to better understand not only the burden of fatalities, but also severe injuries. And we were actually surprised to find that a full half of people seen at the trauma center are there for transportation-related injuries. It's approximately 500 people a year hospitalized with severe traffic injuries. Again, seniors are disproportionately impacted. And when we look at medical costs, the direct medical costs alone are $35 million annually. A third of the people that are the most severely injured comprise 75% of the cost. And that really speaks, again, to Vision Zero and our opportunities to reduce both social and monetary costs by addressing this serious public health issue. Again, speeding is really core. As Supervisor Yee already elegantly stated, speeding is really core to reducing those most severe injuries and fatalities, and that's because when a fast-moving vehicle hits a pedestrian, the speed at which the vehicle is traveling predicts survival. So at 20 miles per hour, approximately 9 out of 10 people will survive. At 40 miles per hour, it's significantly reduced to only 20% of people surviving a crash. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom McGuire to continue our presentation.
Thanks, Megan. So as Megan said, we know that we have a public health crisis of traffic fatalities in San Francisco. We know that speeding is the primary behavior that results in those fatalities. But fortunately, we also know that there is a tool that's been proven in jurisdictions around the country to help stop the speeding problem, and it's not something we need to reinvent here. 142 communities are currently using automated speed enforcement, and they're achieving some really remarkable results. I won't read everything on this slide, but reductions in fatalities, reductions in speeding, reductions in the number of vehicles speeding. These are the kind of things that we need to be able to do if we're going to reduce that key number, which is the 30 number of fatalities we have every year. And as a result, the Assembly Bill 342 language is specifically drafted to address the speeding problem. I'll just give an overview of some of the key features of the legislation. AB 342 would create a 5-year pilot program for just 2 cities, San Francisco and San Jose, which have committed to Vision Zero. It would allow those cities to deploy cameras on a limited number of streets with a documented history of fatal and serious injury collisions. So it's not every street in the city, it's not even every street on the high injury network. It's the streets that have the most severe speeding and fatality and injury problems. We would define speeding as being 10 miles above the speed limit. So again, we're going after excessive speeding here. This is not a gotcha. This is not a speed trap. This is going after the excessive speeding that is associated with the fatalities on our streets. And the penalty would be an administrative penalty, the equivalent of a parking ticket, $100, not a motor vehicle violation or a moving violation. We've talked to jurisdictions around the country who have implemented what we call ASE. Cities like Portland, Seattle, and New York, they don't report any reductions in forces of their police or law enforcement. So the concern that this could somehow displace law enforcement jobs has not been borne out by the cities that are already doing automated speed enforcement. In fact, they find that it's what they call a force multiplier, which allows them to extend the influence of targeted enforcement without bringing on incurring additional costs. It also lets them operate in places where it may be unsafe for our law enforcement officers to either park or stand on the side of busy or narrow roadways. So it extends our coverage to those very unsafe streets in our city. And of course, cameras are able to enforce the law very impartially, based strictly on speeding, not based on any opinion the officer may have about the vehicle. We have an impressive list of supporters. I won't repeat what Supervisor Yee said, but again, it's a cross-cutting list of supporters. And I want to note that just last week, the San Jose City Council, debating a very similar matter as what's before you today, passed a unanimous resolution in support of AB 342. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions you have. And as Megan said, our colleagues in the Mayor's office and Assemblymember Chu's office are also here.
Okay. I don't see any questions, so Supervisor Tang.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So one of the things, I know that there was some language in AB 342 about the program evaluation, given that this is a pilot, but I'm wondering if you can go into a little bit more detail about what we, or SFMTA as an agency, is going to be looking for specifically around, percentage and reduction of collisions or fatalities, or, if you can go into more detail about that.
That's right. So the legislation provides that the two jurisdictions, San Jose and San Francisco, would both prepare evaluation reports on how ASE is doing, and that's specific. It's primarily about that key measure of effectiveness: have we reduced fatalities, have we reduced collisions and injuries, and on the specific corridors where we're enforcing with cameras, are we reducing speeding? So one of the things that our counterparts in cities like New York have found is that when the cameras are out for a period of time, they see not only fatalities reduced, but they'll see that drivers react to the cameras by slowing down. So they issue fewer violations as the program endures. So it's those measures of effectiveness.
But is that the sole way that you're going to evaluate whether the overall speed has gone down, is just by looking at the number of citations that are issued, or are you actually going to have some people out to, monitor or so forth?
Good question. We will also do a before and after speed study. In fact, the legislation requires us to do an engineering speed study, which we would need to do anytime we change a speed limit, and we'll do that before and after to make sure that.
Okay. And then in terms of the corridors where they'll be located, so it says only deployed on streets with documented collisions due to speeding, resulting in injuries and deaths. I imagine you probably don't have the exact locations of where you deploy the cameras in San Francisco, but I'm wondering if certainly I've seen the high injury corridor maps before, but I had heard, for example, that potentially you couldn't do this on streets maintained by Caltrans, for example. So that would mean no 19th Avenue, no slope.
Right.
Is that correct?
Unfortunately, that is right. It would strictly be on city streets, not on freeways or on Caltrans owned roads like the ones you mentioned. We know those are also high injury corridors, but the way the pilot program is carved out is it's really about giving the cities, because cities are leading on Vision Zero in so many parts of the country and definitely in California, it's really about cities using their authority over their streets to test this idea out.
Okay. And then, of course, wherever we would deploy these cameras, there would be clear signage to indicate, especially if there's visitors coming, they would know, that there's a camera there. Okay.
The legislation specifically requires us to note that locations are video enforced.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Let me bring up Jennifer Kwok. She's the district director at the Assembly Members Chu's office.
Hi, good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Jen Court on behalf of Assemblymember David Chu's office. Just want to thank you for considering AB 342 and for this board's support of automated speed enforcement in the past. As you've just heard, every year dozens of San Franciscans are involved in fatal traffic incidents. Hundreds more are seriously injured in traffic collisions, which would easily be avoided by safe and responsible driving habits. Speeding is the leading cause of fatal and serious incidents, and San Francisco has the highest number of these collisions per capita in California. The data shows that 70% of these fatal and severe collisions occur on just a handful of streets and roads in San Francisco, and often these incidents occur in communities with a large number of low-income, disabled, and minority residents. Research from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and dozens of other studies have indicated that automated speed enforcement systems result in measurable safety improvements at high crash locations and can reduce crashes in surrounding areas and streets around the city. As a part of Vision Zero, San Francisco has certainly stepped up its enforcement in cracking down on dangerous speeding, but we can and we should do more. This bill is about giving San Francisco and your counterparts in San Jose the flexibility and a new set of tools to effectively reduce speeding and cut down on the number of fatal and serious traffic incidents. The legislation is about using every available tool to save lives and to improve the safety of some of our most vulnerable travelers, which kids going to school, cyclists going to work, and seniors on their way home from the grocery store. So automated speed enforcement targets drivers and vehicles that put the public at a greater risk. As part of Vision Zero, our goal is to eliminate serious and fatal collisions from our city, and automated speed enforcement will help us get there. So just want to thank you for your consideration and hope that we can count on this board's continued support.
Thank you very much. Next up, I'd like to bring up Katie Angati. She's from the mayor's office.
Good afternoon, Chair Farrell, Supervisor Peskin, and Supervisor Tang. My name is Katie Ngati. I work on state and federal legislative affairs for the mayor's office, and I'm here to support this resolution. I want to first thank you, Supervisor Yee, for introducing this, and Supervisor Peskin for co-sponsoring this, as well as Supervisor Kim Sapai and Sheehy. I also wanted to acknowledge the city departments, SFMTA, the police department, the Department of Public Health, and the Vision Zero stakeholders, Walk SF, and Bike Coalition, just to name a few, for transforming this Vision Zero best practice into a bill. In order to eliminate traffic-related deaths, it's imperative that we target the top contributor of these deadly traffic collisions in San Francisco, which we all know by now is unsafe speed. To address this dangerous and systematic driving behavior, it's important that we use all the tools in our toolbox. Automated speed enforcement is a proven method to reduce excessive speeding and reduce traffic-related deaths and injuries. Automated speed enforcement is not a new technology. It's currently being used in over 140 communities across the United States, including our fellow Vision Zero cities, such as Portland, Seattle, Chicago, and New York City. And these cities have seen decreases in speeding on their streets. They've seen reductions in collisions and reductions in traffic fatalities. But state law currently prevents us from using this tool, and it must be changed. AB 342 would change state law and give the city and county of San Francisco the opportunity to test this life-saving technology on our streets. I'd like to applaud the leadership of Assemblymember Chu for authoring this legislation, and we look forward to putting this bill into action and saving lives on our streets.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Okay. I'd like to bring up Nicole Ferreira from Walk SF.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Thank you, Chair Farrell and commissioners or committee members. Nicole Ferrara with Walk San Francisco, and we've been working hand in hand with the city and the supervisor, the assembly member, and the community to support this really incredible life-saving tool and great policy, and urge your support today. You've heard a lot from city leaders here about why this policy is so important. So I wanted to take some time to put a face to the stories behind those numbers and those stats. Every 18 hours, someone is severely injured or killed in traffic. 5 times a day, a surgeon from SF General's pager goes off to let them know that someone is being rushed through their doors and might not come back out because of a traffic crash. And 1 in 4 of those crashes are people who were hit from a speeding vehicle. And we know that we can address that, and that's the importance of this tool. So I want to share a few images. These are members of Families for Safe Streets. This is Jim Jones. Jim is a father. His wife passed away from a heart attack. He has one daughter. His daughter got a phone call one morning that her father was hit and killed. Thankfully, Jim recuperated. It was a miracle. He literally was killed. His heart stopped, and he was brought back to life in a miracle way. And Jim was able to make it to his daughter's wedding, who's shown here. This is Dylan Mitchell, who was 21 years old and hit and killed. Dylan didn't have the same fortunate fate as Jim. Dylan was riding his bike on 16th Street in the Mission and hit and killed by a truck. This is Armand Lester, son of Alvin Lester, Alvin's only son, hit and killed at 3rd and Cargo from a speeding vehicle who took a quick turn and ran him over. Armand was studying to finish his college degree and working 3 jobs. He was a great person, outstanding member of our community, and his life was taken away in an instant. And this is little Eileen Quiroz, who was 3 years old, walking in a school crosswalk in San Jose, holding her aunt's hand and her sibling's hand, and hit by a speeding vehicle who didn't yield. She lost her life in a school crosswalk. And finally, this is Judy Cito, who was hit at Anza and Park Presidio by a speeding driver. Judy was in the crosswalk, and Judy suffers every day. Her daughter, Jenny, takes care of her, helping her cope with everyday life, unsure of what kind of future she'll have each day, and had to change her life around as a result. So these are just some of the people behind those figures. These are 6 people behind that 30-person stat of people who have been killed every single year, and the 500 more who get severely injured. They could be any of us, in fact. So I can't reiterate how important this technology is. I know you all led in adopting Vision Zero unanimously at this board. And this is really one of the very, very important ways for you to continue that leadership and show that we're all here as a city united to support automated speed enforcement. So I urge you all today to support it and to, in fact, co-sponsor the legislation if you have not already. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I'd like to call up Janice Lee from the Bike Coalition.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Hello, everyone. Janice Lee, the Advocacy Director of the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. I think we've heard the stats, the stories, so much of why this is so important. So I want to talk a little bit about the bill. So, of course, as you know, last year, all 4 of you and the rest of the Board of Supervisors unanimously passed a resolution in support of automated speed enforcement. I am incredibly proud of the work that has been achieved thus far to get to the current version of the bill, which is AB 342, which was introduced, as mentioned, by Assemblymember David Chu, and has also the support of the San Francisco delegation with Assemblymember Phil Ting and Senator Scott Wiener on board as well. With statewide support, we really hope that this committee moves forward with a support position as well. This is just such an important bill, but what I'm actually really proud of, there were efforts in the past to get a version of this bill introduced. That did not happen until this year, but what happened in 2016 was an incredible amount of work to really use this pilot opportunity to look at really progressive ways to shape the bill that makes the most sense, make sure that the right streets are chosen and it's not sort of at random, because we know that the fines and fees structure, the data privacy structure, just the operationalizing of this very massive program and all the details as part of it could be replicated in all of California after this pilot happens. And we want to make sure that all the details are correct. So really applaud the work that has been done at every single level through the SFMTA, Department of Public Health, along with the leadership of Assemblymember David Chu to get the bill to where it is today. We know that it will still probably be amended. It'll still have to go to the Sacramento processes. But we wouldn't have done those amendments if it weren't also from the feedback that we were hearing from all of you around the privacy concerns or around making sure that this program is really solving the issue and bringing to light the real issue of speeding and the dangers on our streets. So with that said, just want to echo what Nicole has said, in that we really hope that you move forward with the support position with full recommendation to the board. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, this is really public comment at this point. Henny Kelly, would you like to come up?
And you notice I am a slow walker now. I want to tell you why the California Alliance for Retired Americans and Senior Disability Action are really supporting this bill. In fact, it's one of the few bills that I, as a legislative director of the California Alliance for Retired Americans, that has over 1 million members, am taking as a priority bill, and we are co-sponsoring this bill. And one of the reasons is that our members are people who are hurt in traffic accidents. 40% of the traffic accidents involve a senior. They are the most severely injured. They have less of a chance of making it. And every time there is an accident on our streets involving a senior that has to go to the hospital, many of them don't come home. And if they do, they still are severely impacted by this. And if you want to save money, you've got to look at how much it costs to send them to the hospital. It's about $78,000 per hospital admission for a serious accident. But it's not that I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is really changing everybody's mindset about getting through this city and helping our citizens. I think the two highly impacted are small children on their way to school and old children like me on their way across the street after I park my car. This is a pilot program, but every city where it has been used has cut the deaths and has cut traffic accidents. We really wanted San Francisco and San Jose to do this as a pilot project so that we can show the rest of California how we can make California safe for all of our residents. I hope that you will vote to pass this on and that the full board will vote in favor of it. And even more than that, I hope that you will join the California Alliance for Retired Americans and sponsor this important bill, because speed kills, because it kills real people, the people you saw in the pictures and people close to you. I was hit by a car when I was 4, and my husband was hit by a car when he was 54. We understand the whole thing about how this changes a family and changes their lives. I hope that we can pass this and that we don't have to say, that we didn't do something that could help all of the people who live in this city. So please vote yes.
Thank you. Next up is Laura Clark. Are you here, Laura Clark? Okay, so any other public comments? Okay.
Supervisors, thank you. How can you talk against safety? You can't. And you know what I've heard?
If you could please speak into the mic.
Oh, I'm
sir.
sorry. From what I've heard, maybe these speed cameras are a good thing to do. I think they're worth trying as an experiment, but I also think that since they are an enforcement measure, we should put them under the control, including placement, of the SFPD. SFMTA has not had a very good record with experiments. The Red Lane experiments, including the one in the Mission, we were never told they were an experiment. There was a debate as to whether the Mission was even included in the area that they asked for the state to experiment. And the SFMTA did not report back to the state as required in either a timely or complete fashion. So I think if we move forward with this, we have to have some really good oversight of SFMTA's reporting. If it stays with SFMTA, I think we should strongly consider putting it with SFPD. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none.
We will close public comment.
So, colleagues, again, I would love to have you pass this out with a positive recommendation. As mentioned, I'd like to thank my co-sponsors, Supervisors Kim, Safai, Peskin, and Sheehy, to support this legislation that will provide the tools actually the most valuable tool that we can have in San Francisco to prevent these collisions that take people's lives and ruin people's families. So I'll leave the rest up to you.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Colleagues, if no further comment or questions, I entertain a motion. And this, just to be clear, would like to be considered as a committee report for tomorrow's board meeting.
Through the chair, I'll make a motion to send it forward to the full board with positive recommendation as a committee report.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Tang, second by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 4?
Yes, item number 4 is a resolution approving an easement agreement with PG&E for land along the northern border of 1975 Galvez Street for $1 and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you very much. Item number 4, Mr. Updike. Here you are. Welcome back.
Thank you, Chair Farrell. John Updike, Director of Real Estate. Good afternoon, members of the committee. This item seeks your approval of an easement agreement with Pacific Gas and Electric for about 3,600 square feet of easement. The project comes from the pending relocation of our central shops from its current location in 1800 Gerald to this site near Selby and Galvez. As part of the development process for the new central shops, it was determined that the current PG&E facilities needed to be relocated. It was also discovered that this area where the current facilities lie is former Galvez Street, which was vacated and sold in 1969. In 1969, the Board of Supervisors directed that an easement be reserved to PG&E's predecessor in interest, but no easement was actually reserved. So it's a little bit of an odd situation. Normally, they would simply be existing in a street under a franchise right and then have to be relocated. So here it's a little bit different. An easement is required. Because of that history, this easement would be delivered at $1 cost and nominal cost to them, even though the property has value. That's the rationale for the no-cost delivery and easement, because of their prior rights in the property. The easement itself ranges from about 10 to 15 feet in width, running the distance of the property along its northerly edge. And PG&E has agreed to the terms of an easement agreement. That easement agreement is in your package. And of course, given that the only party who could really use this easement is the utility, there is no need for a competitive process, so that is noted in the resolution. And it's also consistent with the general plan referral that is in the file. Happy to answer any questions. I'm also joined by my colleague from DPW if you have questions about this particular relocation effort.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Updike. Colleagues, any questions? Supervisor Peskin.
Yeah, two things. One is just a housekeeping matter, which is that generally in easements like this, there's usually a map that shows the current easement and the future easement that it's being exchanged for, and here that plat map of the easement area is blank on the attachment to be filled in, so it'd be nice to have that for us and the public to see.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. That's an excellent point. Recognizing we did not have a map in the board file, this depicts that easement right running, as I say, between 10 and 15 feet in width, just off the northerly edge of the property. It is out of, this moves it out of the path of our future development envelope for the Central Shops project.
And then the other thing I was just going to ask was in the larger context of 1975 Galvez, which doesn't have to do with the value of this easement, but insofar as I have you in front of us, has to do with the original purchase price plus the purchase price for the acquisition of the balance of the leasehold interest, and whether or not, as I said to your staff last week, Mr. Gavin, we have, well, I should say insofar as we never had an appraisal of the original purchase, but we had some comps and some listings, whether or not we believe that the $1,650,000 for the purchase of the 10 or so year balance of the leasehold interest, together with the approximately $5 million purchase price, is still within the fair market value of the property.
Supervisor, while not exactly this item before the committee right now, yes, we do believe that that is justified, particularly based on the new appraisal information. I believe that's a subsequent item later this week in front of a different committee where we'll have a more robust discussion about that.
I figured insofar as I had that one of those committee members here, I could pollute his thinking.
Okay, colleagues, any further questions or comments? We open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on the easement for $1? No public comment. Public comment is closed. Colleagues, entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to send forth this item to the full board with positive recommendation.
Okay, motion by Supervisor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
As a committee report.
As a committee report. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Motion by Supervisor Tang, second by Supervisor Peskin. Thank you, Mr. Updike. We can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 5?
Yes, item number 5 is a hearing on the 5-year monitoring reports of the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. I tell you what, do have one of our colleagues here potentially speak on this item. Tell you what, why don't we go on a 2-minute recess? Sure. Check about Supervisor Cohen, and then we'll be back. So we're in recess.
SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television.
Welcome back, everybody. We are back from recess for our regularly scheduled Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting for Monday, March 13th, 2017. Madam Clerk, what do you call item 5?
Yes, item number 5 is a hearing on the 5-year monitoring reports of the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan.
Okay, thanks very much. Colleagues, this item was sponsored by Supervisor Cohen, who's joining us in committee, so I will turn it over to her.
Great, thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for hearing this item today. I believe most of you are very familiar with the Eastern Neighborhood Plan. Just by way of background, this particular plan was adopted in 2009 after more than a decade of a public process with the community in the Central Waterfront, the Potrero Hills, Showplace Square, East Soma, Western Soma, and the Mission neighborhoods. And for the last 10 to 15 years, these neighborhoods have been changing and have grown and have seen the land use conflicts that have arisen, where residential and office development has begun to compete with industrial uses. So the Eastern Neighborhood Plan represents two very key policy goals. First, it's to ensure a stable future for PDR businesses, and that's production, distribution, and repair. It's a special planning terminology that we are going to be using today. PDR businesses by preserving lands suitable for these types of uses. The second key policy goal of the Eastern Neighborhood Plan is to provide a significant amount of affordable housing for low, moderate, and middle-income households, with the emphasis on providing, quote, complete neighborhoods, end quote. You'll hear that term often, I'm sure, throughout this presentation and in public comment. In providing complete neighborhoods, that provides amenities for the existing and also new residents. So the ordinance that enacted the Eastern Neighborhood Plan required that the Planning Department produce a 5-year report monitoring residential and commercial developments in these particular neighborhoods, as well as monitor the impact fees that have been generated and the public and private investments in community benefits, as well as the infrastructure. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. We will also be hearing directly from the Eastern Neighborhood Citizens Advisory Committee regarding their response to the monitoring report. Also, we're going to be hearing about how most of the development in our city is happening on the eastern neighborhood, eastern part of the city, impacting the eastern neighborhoods. So I believe it's critical for all of the collective board of supervisors to understand that these changes are occurring and that they're directly related to many of the land use decisions and policies changes that we are making. And with that, I'd like to bring up Pedro Peterson from the Planning Department to make the presentation. Colleagues, I handed out to you a copy of the presentation, so you should have that before you. And following Pedro's presentation, we'll hear from Keith Goldstein, a representative on the Eastern Neighborhood CAC. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Thank you, supervisors, for having me here today to talk a little bit about the Eastern Neighborhoods monitoring reports. for the period between 2011 and 2015. Just a brief presentation outline. I will give a little bit of a background about the Eastern Neighborhoods Plans, just to add to what Supervisor Cohen just discussed, and go over the reporting requirements that were in the legislation that adopted the plans. Talk a little bit about the commercial development activity in the Eastern Neighborhoods and the jobs trends that we saw during the period of the monitoring reports. Discuss residential development activity and affordable housing within the plan areas, and then finish with a discussion of the impact fees and community benefits programs that enabled by the plan. So, as Supervisor Cohen mentioned, the Eastern Neighborhoods Area Plans, there are 5 sets of plans. 4 were adopted in 2009. Mission, East Soma, Showplace Square, Potrero Hill, and Central Waterfront. The Western Soma community had a bit of a parallel process, and that plan was adopted in 2013. And in addition to neighborhood-specific goals and objectives, the plans have a twin set of overarching policy goals that span across all the 5 project areas. The first is the stabilization of PDR activity. The predominant industrial zoning in the Eastern Neighborhoods prior to the adoption of the plans was M zoning, which allowed for a broad range of uses, including office and residential, with conditional use authorization. So the idea of the plans were to carve out some neighborhood or some areas that would be appropriate for protection as PDR protection zones, as well as to produce more housing at higher levels of affordability, and to generate impact fees that would allow for complete neighborhoods and for the installation of infrastructure to support that housing, and in combination with other city resources to improve infrastructure in general in the Eastern Neighborhoods. And the ordinance also created a Citizens Advisory Committee to provide input and oversight on the implementation of the plans, and I'd like to thank the CAC for working closely with us on the production of these monitoring reports. We worked with them for 9 months, and they provided crucial feedback on our data and on even the scoping of the monitoring reports to make sure that it really answered their policy concerns. So the reporting requirements for the Eastern Neighborhoods Area Plans are that we report on all development activity that took place during the monitoring period. So for these monitoring reports, it's for the period 2011-2015, and then the current pipeline as of the end of that period, so as of December 31st, 2015. So the issue with that is that a lot of the development activity that occurred during that time within the boundaries of the Eastern Neighborhoods were not entitled pursuant to the plans. So there were projects, for example, entitled prior to the adoption of the plans, projects that will seek entitlements under separate plans and EIRs. So, for example, Central Soma and Pier 70 and the Potrero Annex Hope SF project. There were conversions of PDR space that were undertaken prior to the plans and legalized through the amnesty program that ended in 2013. As well as smaller projects that didn't rely on the rezoning, so for example, small residential projects. And so the numbers that I will present today include all of these. If you have questions about the numbers that don't include these kinds of projects, I have a table that we can talk about after the presentation. But this is what the legislation required, so this is what I'll be reporting on. The reporting requirements also include a discussion of the public benefits, including the impact fees generated by the plan and the community benefits program, other sources of revenue in addition to the impact fees to fund the program and implementation, agency responsibilities and budget implications. So the commercial activity, commercial development activity that took place between 2011 and 2015, this table summarizes that, but I will sort of walk through some of the highlights of the table. In that sort of first column there, cultural, institutional, and educational, space, we added about 400,000 square feet. But pretty much all of that is attributable to the SF General Hospital expansion in the Showplace Square Potrero Hill neighborhood. There was about even development of office and conversion of PDR space, close to 1 million square feet, and the total amount of commercial square feet developed net was about 460,000. As I mentioned, some of these projects, for example, the converted PDR, were projects that were approved prior to the plans. And so, for example, at 1880 Mission Street, we converted about 63,000 square feet of PDR into about 200 units of housing. This is a project that was approved in 2006 before the plans were adopted, but they were completed in 2013, and so this is why it shows up as a loss of PDR during this period. Another example is at 1550 Bryant. There was a loss of 93,000 square feet of PDR that shows up here, but this was a conversion to office that happened well before the plans were adopted, and it was legalized under this program that sunsetted in 2013. As far as jobs, the Eastern Neighborhoods added roughly 32,000 jobs between 2010 and 2015. The greatest gains by land use were in office occupations, which added about 20,000 jobs, as well as retail that added about 9,000 jobs. And even though there was a loss of PDR space, as I mentioned, we actually added 2,000 jobs during this period in PDR activities.
Could you explain the acronym CIE?
Oh, sure. CIE is Cultural, Institutional, and Educational Institutions.
So is that like an art gallery?
It would be art galleries. It would be, for example, the SF General is classified under here. Schools.
And you said it's a cultural institution?
Educational.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
And there's some sort of data issues here. You know, you look at other, it went down while CIE went up, and I think some of that had to do with how the state classifies like personal medical services that were classified under other and now is under CIE. So there's some sort of nuances there, but.
And how do you explain visitor?
Visitor is tourist hotels. Yeah, so I don't think it would include like short-term rentals and things like that. Or restaurants. Restaurants would be under retail.
And what falls under the other category?
You know, I am not sure. I can get back to you on that. I think it might be things like personal services and just things that don't sort of fall neatly under all of these, but I can follow up.
Thank you. Okay.
And so one of the interesting things that we found here is that we added 32,000 jobs and without adding a whole lot of commercial space. And so a couple of possible explanations for that we think is, well, first of all, 2010 was during the recession, and in 2015 the economy was growing, and so part of that might just be formerly vacant spaces that were occupied. But we also, especially with office jobs, there's a lot of stuff being written in the literature about how there's basically a densification of office occupations, and so you have more jobs per given amount of square feet. So maybe some of that is happening as well. So as for the pipeline, we basically see a similar trend happening where we are seeing a gain in office space and a loss in PDR space. So we see here there is about 5 million square feet in office and 1.4 square foot loss in PDR. But of the 5 million square feet in office space, 4 million is located in Central Soma or Pier 70, and so these are projects that are still under review, where the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors still has discretion over those projects. And as for the PDR, 1.4 million loss of PDR in the pipeline. Of that, about 1 million is still projects that are under review, so projects that have not received entitlement. And for residential development, so during this period, we added about 1,400 residential units, 21% of which were affordable. So if we remove the 100% affordable from this projects from this total and just look at what the inclusionary program added, it was about 17% of all the units, so higher than the 12% that was mandated by the city during this period. 69 units were in 100% affordable projects, and 221 were developed through the inclusionary program. And one example of this is the 900 Folsom, where we added 202 units, 40 of which were below market rate. A couple of other examples. That top one, 1880 Mission, is the one that I mentioned. That was approved in 2006 and was finally completed in 2013. There was a printing press that got developed into almost 200 units of housing. So in the pipeline, or at least as of the end of 2015, we had about 11,650 units. Of that, 7,400 were still under review, and then about 4,000 were entitled, either under construction, so about 3,000 that were actually under construction, or about 1,000 that were entitled but hadn't broken ground yet. Here it is by plan area. So 1,800 units in the Mission, about 2,600 in Central Waterfront, though a lot of those are in Pier 70. 1,300 in Western Soma and Eastern Soma, thereabouts. Again, some of those are part of Central Soma projects that are still under review and subject to approval of the Central Soma plan. And then in Showplace Square, Potrero Hill, there are 4,500 units in the pipeline. 2,600 are still under review, and that includes the 1,000 units at the Hope SF project, Potrero Annex. So the impact fees and community benefits programs through the end of 2015, we had collected about $50 million in impact fees that are divided between these 5 different buckets. The biggest buckets, if you will, are the transportation and transit and recreation and open space that get about $17 million, or each of the $50 million. And they were collected from all 5 of the different area plans. And some of the major infrastructure projects that have received funding from the Impact Fees program include Daggett Park, which is open last fall, 17th and Folsom Park in the Mission that is set to open this spring. Major rehabilitation of South Park that was also just completed, as well as pedestrian and transit projects, for example, 16th Street in Mission and Showplace Square, Potrero Hill area plans, Folsom and Howard in Eastern and Western Soma, and so on. And just to give you an idea of the sort of geographic distribution of these projects, they're kind of sort of distributed throughout the 5 plan areas. So with that, I conclude my presentation and welcome to take any questions that you have.
Thank you. I was wondering if you had one of the things that perpetuated me to bring this hearing request is because I am in agreement with my constituents that are concerned that there are projects that are moving forward that are not paying attention to the cumulative impact of the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And your presentation didn't really talk about that. It was more high level about the facts and of the 5-year evaluation, mm-hmm. and that's fine. But I was wondering if you could offer any kind of insight of your process or reasoning as it relates to paying attention to cumulative impacts that these multiple projects are having, particularly on the Showplace Square area, particularly on the Potrero Hill, Dogpatch, even the Northeastern Mission.
Sure. Well, before the plans were adopted, we had, the EIR studied the cumulative impact of these projects and estimated a set number of units that would be like residential units and commercial development that would go in these neighborhoods. I can show you if I just. If we're looking at the projects that were entitled or under review just pursuant to the Eastern Neighborhoods plans, for example, the EIR's preferred project alternative estimated that there would be about 9,800 units built across the Eastern Neighborhoods. And what we have, or at least as of the end of 2015, no, this is as of September of last year, there have been about 1 million units completed and about 1,600 units under construction. And the entire pipeline, if everything gets approved and built, would be about 8,000 units over the next 5-7 years or so. So we understand that it's a pretty.
So it
large
sounds
number
like the
of
plan
units.
doesn't necessarily take into account some of the concerns that I'm hearing about the impact. I mean, you acknowledge that there's an impact, but it's almost like, okay, I know there's an impact, but it's, so what, who cares? Or I'm sorry, what we're trying to do is to find a balance.
Yeah.
That, so it's not so much of a cavalier attitude, but saying, okay, we hear you. We need to account for these impacts. We need to make an adjustment. Is there room, and if so, where would we be able to make this type of adjustment in the Eastern Neighborhood Plan?
So, I mean, the monitoring reports, the purpose of the reports was more to track the progress of the plan. So we sort of shied away from offering sort of a policy discussion in there, other than to note that some of the impacts were sort of accounted for by the EIR and by the plan, and also that, the sort of the nature of maybe impact fee funding for these kinds of things is that the development happens and we collect the fees, and then that might sort of lag, and so you might see the infrastructure might lag somewhat from the actual.
Do you have an
units
idea
on
on
the
how
ground.
much that lag is? So,
No.
I mean, I can give you an idea. So in terms of to quantify it, I mean, we're talking about, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's almost like a $26 million gap between development and infrastructure improvements that are needed. So, and that's just the financial side of things. Usually things don't materialize until you have the money. So I would imagine the timeline is even further behind the gap. So you can see you're familiar with the plan. You just made the presentation, and so it's a policy discussion that I'm trying to push for us to begin to have. And I think this is the most appropriate place to begin to have this conversation. It's frustrating to shoulder such an awesome responsibility with all of the development happening in a small little section of San Francisco, and you're kind of almost like promised that you're going to get infrastructure dollars, let alone infrastructure improvement, but yet not really seeing that catch up with the development project itself. So, for example, we've got projects that are already built, but we don't have simple things like street lights, or in some parts of the district, sidewalks and crosswalks. So I mean, it's very hard to graciously accept projects that are entitled before I got on the Board of Supervisors, and probably entitled well before many of the current advocates are that are at the table now, and to graciously accept this and say this is the way, when there is no benefit, there's no community neighborhood benefit that that the impact fees were promised to deliver.
My colleague Matt Snyder might be able
Yes, Matt Snyder, welcome to the mic.
Thank you. Matt Snyder, Planning Department staff. A couple of things to note about the infrastructure and the lag. First of all, for our impact fees, the $50 million that we've received as of the close of the last fiscal year, probably 80% of that came in the year before, the 2 years before. So the money hasn't really come in until fairly recently. And the story is a little bit different of each of the impact types. We have generally, the three main categories: transportation, transit, complete streets, streetscaping, and then open space. For transportation and transit, part of the lag may be the reason that we committed to, we kind of partnered with the other agencies and we said, let's identify some priority projects and put 80% of our money towards those projects so we can really commit to them. Those projects are Folsom Street, Howard, through South of Market, and then 16th Street, the 22 Fillmore, through Show Place and the Mission. And those, as you have said, they have just taken a long time to get through environmental and to get going. Folsom and Howard has not yet completed through its environmental. So on that side, that is one reason for that lag. We have also been trying to be very working with our agency partners to be flexible and to be nimble and to kind of fill holes while you possibly can. We're now contributing about a third of the money to the 2nd Street project through South of Market, and that's going to be, I think, a great project, full streetscape, complete streets project. 22nd Street through Central Waterfront is another project that we prioritize beyond the priority projects. For open space, I know there's a lot of frustration, and I think probably some of that frustration is that they felt like we should have committed to more open space from the beginning. But the Eastern Neighborhoods plans very specifically had committed to one new park and one rehabilitated park in each of the 5 neighborhoods. We're actually making some good progress on that. And again, we've just 3 parks just recently have finally opened or are about to open, and that's South Park is a rehabilitation park in South of Market, Daggett Park in Show Place Square, and the 17th and Folsom Park for the Mission Street. And we're looking at sort of a second working park to identify some other big projects for that spending, but those are more in the preliminary stages.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. I appreciate that explanation. It looks like Supervisor Katie Tang has a couple questions.
Thank you very much. I know that there is a lot of talk about loss of PDR space and so forth, and originally in one of the ballot measures that was on for November, for example, had initially included I believe Eastern Neighborhoods, but we had taken it out. And one of the questions I asked during those hearings was just whether there has been any analysis as to the quality of the PDR spaces. So I know there's a lot of talk about, displacement of it and loss of it, but there were some cases, and not particularly in Eastern Neighborhoods, but there were some others, where they were PDR spaces, but not necessarily, say, open to the public or well utilized by the community. And so I had hoped for a deeper analysis on really the quality of the PDR space. And for example, why I disagreed with that ballot measure was one of the reasons was because I didn't feel like just one-for-one replacement meant that you were going to get a great community, space in lieu of what had previously existed. And so have there been any thoughts or analysis around that?
So we haven't done an analysis in our department of the quality of the PDR space. We have been talking about perhaps doing something like that as part of a sort of a PDR strategy, but it's not something that we've started yet. So yeah, I mean, for example, the space that I mentioned at 1880 Mission was a print shop that hadn't been in use, and it was converted to 200 units of housing. But then there's it's sort of, I think any of that conversion, particularly given the sort of the industrial tradition of these neighborhoods, it will be contentious. So I think I agree that it would be important to look at.
I think it would be really helpful to see that, because I mean, we certainly never want to pit a PDR use against housing, right? But that certainly that such scenario has come up before. But I mean, if that's okay with Supervisor Cohen as well, I would like for our departments, our planning department, to look at that, because I think it just will help inform future projects coming up. Again, just to say there's a loss of PDR, I don't feel like sometimes it's actually a fair analysis of what's really going on in the community.
Thank you. So to the chair, I have no further questions. Thank you for your presentation, Pedro.
Okay, thanks very much. At this point, we'll open this up to public comment. If anybody wishes to comment on item number 5, Supervisor Cohen has some speaker cards. Why don't you read them out?
Sure. I have 2 speaker cards in front of me, and again, if you haven't filled one out, that's okay. You'll be able to come up and speak. First, call up Allison Heath, followed by Jude. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You're right. Keith Goldstein is making a presentation. I'm sorry, Keith. I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
Thanks. Thanks very much, supervisors, for allowing us to come here today. I'm Keith Goldstein, Vice Chair of the Eastern Neighborhood CAC, and thanks very much to Supervisor Cohen for arranging this presentation today. We have been meeting for about the last 7 years, and so as part of the monitoring report, the CAC presented a response letter with a more on-the-ground perspective of which doesn't paint quite as rosy a picture as you've been hearing from the planning department of what's going on there. So just to quickly summarize, stable PDR, affordable housing, complete neighborhoods were the main goals of the plan. And then they established 4 different principles. Lots of PDR again, new industries, new housing, and complete neighborhoods. And so our response letter took each of those principles, and although we agree with the planning department that some aspects are working, there are some things that we don't think are working. And so what I'd like to present to you today on behalf of the CAC is what we don't think is working, and also some proposed strategies that we brainstormed that we thought might help this situation. So looking at the PDR situation first, basically there's a whole change in the nature, it appears, of PDR businesses. The traditional blue-collar jobs are disappearing. I'm not really talking about blacksmiths or buggy whip manufacturers, right? Auto repair shops, plumbers, sheet metal manufacturers. I own a waterproofing company myself, and I see the businesses that I do work with disappearing. And you know, businesses like mine offer well-paid jobs to unskilled workers, to immigrants, to previously unemployed.
Excuse me, Keith, just to interrupt, I just want to bring to SF TV's attention that you have a PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you.
Just because you're speaking, but we're not seeing it.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Oh, you're not seeing it? Sorry.
No. So SF TV, the PowerPoint presentation. There we go. Okay.
Aha.
Continue.
And as we're seeing, the ground floor of buildings now, they don't have PDR uses anymore. You're not going to have a painting contractor at the bottom of a building with $2 million units there. There is been an increase in the maker community, definitely, but it's the repair and distribution. There's the P, that's the production, that's contractors, distribution, warehousing. You don't see warehouse jobs anymore. The makers are doing quite well, but the other 2 categories are disappearing. This just reiterates the points that I just made, that there is no mechanism here to keep these PDR businesses in the Eastern Neighbours. And I do want to reiterate that this is not backward looking. There's always going to be a need for a repair shop. Buildings are always going to leak. People's always going to need a plumber. So we need to keep those businesses around to have a complete community. And we're seeing terrible losses among the small artists, although we see at 1275 Minnesota, the big gallery stuff, there's your small independent artists and performance spaces, they're just getting kicked out left, right, and center. So we're seeing a lot of growth in the technology and biotech industries, and that's where we're actually seeing somehow there's this broad definition that these biotech industries are the new PDR jobs, and we don't want to stop those, but we've got to keep the other types of jobs because from what I see, the biotech industries do not attract these immigrants, previously incarcerated people, previously unemployed people that might go and work for a waterproofing company or an auto repair shop. The CAC is very concerned about the affordable housing issue, I think we don't need to really harp on this too much. Everybody seems to know that that it costs a hell of a lot more money, basically, to live in this city, and that there's not many spaces left for people on moderate or low incomes, or even above average incomes, to live in this city. And then, of course, what we're seeing in our neighborhoods is a large pressure on rent-controlled units. And this UMU seems to mean build as much luxury space whilst meeting that affordable housing requirement as you possibly can, not creating a complete neighborhood. So we've seen a tremendous surge in luxury units. It would be nice to see a surge at the same level in affordable housing units. And just as the impact on our neighborhoods, it's really extreme. The plan's 8 years old, and we've already gone way above, not way above, I mean, we've marginally exceeded those that were projected in the plan, and we're still several years to go on the plan. And the infrastructure development, as you've heard from Supervisor Cohen, is lagging. We don't have enough money to fund the improvements. We don't know how we're going to get more money. And this seems to us to be a clear failure in how this plan was developed. The lag time it's according to the plan department, money is coming, but they mentioned that 80% of the impact fees are dedicated basically to 16th Street and Folsom Street. And so that's great. So we're going to have a great bus line and a road down to the Warriors Stadium and Mission Bay, and nice transit down Folsom Street so you can go to work at the tech industries on 2nd Street. But we have hardly any money left for neighborhood improvements within our community, 20%. So when the community comes to us with requests for more money to build a park or a crosswalk, or, you know, there ain't no money because all the money's set aside for these two big projects, which I'm not so sure have that much of a direct impact on the communities most affected by all of the development. The green space is not quite as rosy a picture again as just was painted. Actually, the 17th and Folsom Park, which I went by just a few days ago, is far from opening in the spring. Finally, the first new park in the neighborhood did open about 2 weeks ago, Daggett Park. You'd be amazed how little of a park you get for $3 million and how small a 1 acre park can be. It's remarkable. South Park has opened up. So the plan says they're meeting the goal of the amount of new open space and green space, but the plan was wrong. We need more. And then there's the non-EIR projects, which massive projects like the Warriors, the Giants, Mission Bay, UCSF, Potrero Power Plant, Pier 70. I mean, those are thousands and thousands of units that are going to have further impacts, and they're not included in the projections for the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan. So those impacts put further stress on all infrastructure needs. And so UMU, as I said before, hasn't really given us this mixed use. I mean, it basically given us a developer has no reason to try and lease a space on a ground floor to a grocery store or a dry cleaner when they can sell that unit for a couple of $1 million. So no neighborhood serving retail commercial ground floor is really an issue, and we need to see that for more complete neighborhoods. Terrible transit, just the very, very poor public transit service, especially the Showplace Potrero, and I don't need to tell any of you if you do drive about traffic congestion, and I think this applies throughout the city. And I hear every week, as I'm the head of the local merchants association, we have a lot of non-profits that are members of our merchants association. We just keep on hearing about them being forced out, and that seems to be another unprojected impact of the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan.
Could you expand a little bit about that that comment, what you're hearing from the merchants? They're being pushed out, and just tease out a little bit as to how that relates to the Eastern Neighborhood Plan.
Well, just how
does the Eastern Neighborhood Plan, or the current plan as it stands, how does it?
Well, I'm not. I mean, it's an indirect impact of the Eastern Neighbours Plan, but I wanted to make that point and then maybe think about some legislation to try and encourage space for non-profits. To maybe include some sort of program to include non-profits as PDR, and some sort of some program to pursue space for non-profit PDR uses, if we could classify non-profit as PDR. But we can't keep seeing all our non-profits disappearing from the eastern neighborhoods.
Thank you.
So that's what we're seeing, and I just wanted to reiterate about the infrastructure that in the Dogpatch neighborhood, I believe the population is projected to grow about 4 times, from 2,000 to about 8,000, maybe as much as 10,000, with planned projects in the pipeline. And this is a neighborhood that still doesn't have any new parks. It's got one tiny children's playground. I mean, minute. It doesn't have sidewalks in many areas. It doesn't have crosswalks. It doesn't have street lighting. And so there's a huge deficit, particularly in the central waterfront. So our CAC came up with some proposed strategies that we'd like to suggest, and we think city agencies could probably take a better look at these things. And Supervisor Tang alluded to this just now with studying trends of specific PDR sectors to see where the jobs are being created or where they're being lost in PDR, and what sort of our population is getting these type of jobs. Maybe put aside some land for PDR, or try and develop Bayshore. I look at Bayshore, there's still a lot of space on Bayshore, and maybe we could zone that. And maybe some funding mechanisms or zoning to encourage new PDR within these districts. Affordable housing, there's obviously Prop C helped, and we hear about this all the time, and we don't have any magic elixir for solving this, but maybe purchasing some sites or increasing affordability levels for affordable housing might help this situation. Trying to figure out the infrastructure needs. Impact fees meet 30% of the infrastructure needs, and that was part of the Eastern Neighbours Plan at the start. You know, as I said before, we've already reached the limit of development there. Increasing impact fee levels, I know OEWD will tell you, and maybe they're right, that developers will back off. There's a certain level that they can get, but that maybe we could do an analysis of see how much they could bear. And then particularly, let's think about spending the money where the impacts actually occur. And as I stated before, 80% of our money is going down a Folsom Street and 16th Street, and I know a lot of neighbors who'd like to see it right on their doorstep. And this is asking for this infrastructure again. Let's think about how we can bring infrastructure improvements in advance of development. I know that this blockage, constipation, is apparently being solved somewhat, and maybe we can figure out some ways to leverage the impact fee revenue to other sources, maybe some sort of bond against revenue stream that might help that. And then just encourage in general the city to take a more holistic approach to projects, that not just look at our eastern neighborhoods or our particular boundary, but everything in general. And so that's some of our strategies for solving these situations that we see. And I would just lastly like to ask if the Board of Supervisors might consider taking a look at all of this as a whole, and and then think about some amendments to the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan that address some of these concerns.
Do you have
So
any
thank you.
suggestion in terms of amendments to the plan? Maybe not now, maybe something you can start to think about.
I think some of my some of my community members may have some insight on that. I'd like to, and our CAC chair, Bruce Huey, is here, and he'd probably like to speak to that as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentation and your time and service.
Thanks very much.
Mr. Chair, I've got two speaker cards in front of me, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. We will open a public comment. Speaker cards. Anyone else who wants to speak, please come on forward. We have that many folks in the room. Please feel free to line up on the far side. Everyone will have 2 minutes.
All right. We've got Allison Heath and Jude Deckenbach.
Hi, I'm Allison Heath, District 10, speaking on behalf of Grow Potrero Responsibly. The Eastern Neighborhoods Plan projected development to 2025. The monitoring report cuts off at the end of 2015 with 10 years left to go. For Potrero Hill, the plan anticipated that 3,180 residential units would be built in the Showplace Potrero area by 2025. The report shows that as of late 2015, we were anticipating 4,526 units, a near doubling of population. Suggestion that infrastructure improvements are keeping up with the pace of development is false. The plan identified a number of laudable objectives, complete communities, and so on, but this promise was broken. Instead, we are falling further behind, overbuilt, and with funding for benefits dependent on even further development. On Potrero Hill, we are told that we live in a transit-rich area as we witness daily increasing traffic gridlock due to the abysmal failure of the city to provide us adequate transit options. Currently, there are no viable mechanisms to fully fund our infrastructure requirements. Impact fees, as Keith mentioned, are artificially low at a third of the need. With adoption of the plan, the board, mayor, and city agencies were supposed to identify and implement future revenue opportunities. That never happened, but we're here now asking that you take this up with the full board. As noted by John King in today's Chronicle, the danger is that when the construction dust settles, what we see around us won't be the city that we love.
Thanks. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Jude Deckenbach, and I'm a 25-year resident of Potrero Hill. I'm a booster, and while I'm not an NCAC member, I do go to all those meetings and all those 9 months of meetings working on the monitoring report, so I'm very familiar with this plan. Today, I'm here, though, representing Friends of Jackson Park. Jackson Park is the park that's at the base of Potrero Hill, close to Showplace Square. Well, Friends of Jackson was formed several years ago for neighborhood concerns of safety at this park after there was a needle stick. We are a neighborhood advocacy group hoping to create and save what little green open space we have in our neighborhood. So I'm going to focus my comments today on the Showplace Square open space plan for Potrero Hill, Showplace Square. The analysis says, and I quote, it reveals that a total of about 4 acres of new open space should be provided in this area to accommodate expected growth. What we've seen so far is less than 1 acre that was opened this year, not last fall at Daggett, as Keith said, is sorely lacking. Objective 5.1 was to provide public parks and open spaces that meet the needs of residents, workers, and visitors. The Planning Department will continue working with the Recreation and Parks Department to decide to identify a place for a public park, and will continue to work to acquire additional open space. Objective 5.3 was to create a network of green streets that connects open spaces and improves the walkability, aesthetics, and ecological sustainability of the neighborhood. You know, Potrero Hill and Dog Patch have historically underserved in terms of open space, and we're digging a deeper hole with need increasing with little or no investment. But I would not come here without a solution, as our lovely supervisor said. Can you guys see that?
Okay, overhead, please, SFGov TV. We see it.
We are working on a project of renovation of Jackson Park. You will see a connection through Related California's development plan there that connects to Enola Maxwell, which is an open space. There is 2.7 acres there that we would like to liberate this land and work with SFUSD and you guys to make this
Thank you,
happen.
ma'am. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm J.R. Epler, President of the Potrero Boosters Neighborhood Association. First, I want to thank the Eastern Neighborhood Citizens Advisory Committee for their response to the monitoring report. I think it highlights quite well some of the deficiencies in the plan as it's been implemented over the last decade. Put broadly, the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan has not fulfilled its promise of providing complete neighborhoods. Keith talked a lot about how we've struggled to achieve the mix in urban mixed-use zoning, and in particular, providing for those smaller businesses so essential to the neighborhood character that we have in the developed parts of the city, but don't have in those areas that are developing. But it's not simply the use mix that leaves our neighborhoods incomplete. Whether we're discussing traffic, calming, transit, or open space, we've been subject to the same ad hoc processes that are used for the city's more established infrastructure-rich neighborhoods. Now, some of that's because, as Keith pointed out, the impact fees only meet 30% of the anticipated developer impact. We dig ourselves deeper with every new approval that we make. And while we're playing catch-up on projects with the fees that we do receive, such as the 16th Street connection between the Mission and Mission Bay, plans for infrastructure designed specifically to mitigate the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan lag. So why do we raise this now, and why do we want to raise this with the full board? Well, we see two things. One, several large projects adjacent to but not part of the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan are imminent, including UCSF's expansion to Dogpatch, Mission Rock, the Warriors, Pier 70, the Potrero Power Plant, the rebuild of Potero's public housing. These large projects provide us with an opportunity to review and perhaps to fund the whole of the community's infrastructure needs rather than just its parts. Second, somewhere along the line, we're going to run out of building capacity under the Eastern Neighborhoods EIR. The monitoring report gives us an incomplete review of the data, but whether it's 6 months ago or 6 months from now, we're going to get there soon. And it will require diligent legislative oversight and support in coordinating the various city agencies with the goals of making good the promises of complete neighborhoods in order to provide for a sustainable path forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Bruce Huey. I am President of the Dogpatch Neighborhood Association, Chair of the ENCAC, one of the founding members of Progress Park, which is a street park in Dogpatch, and also a founding member of the playground that Keith referenced in his statement. We actually are looking for more open space in Dogpatch and more amenities, infrastructure, just to give you a perspective on cumulative impacts. Within the next 9 to 12 months, 3 apartment buildings will open up, 650 Indiana, 800 Indiana, and 1201 Tennessee. They will have about 725 units. If we calculate about 2 persons per unit, they're going to double our population within a year. So in terms of cumulative impacts, we don't have a grocery store that we can walk to. We can get to transportation that sometimes is reliable. I think what we want to try to focus in on is more sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rick Hall. I think one of the things we need to, actually, let me get to the bottom line. My ask is that the full board does something to start digging into this and reviewing policy, not only for the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan itself, but for all of the other stuff that impacts us. And I think, we really need to look at how we do these plans. They seem to be done with a construction mindset, with the zoning as the only tool. Our planning department doesn't even have a sociologist on the staff. The problems we're seeing, aren't, about square feet of acres of park or, numbers of buses. It's the sociological impact that this new construction and the new residents bring with it that we need to address. I think if we address it through a sociological lens, in addition to a land use lens, we'll have a lot better result for the people of this city. And I think, that's not going to happen at one hearing. I do think we need to dig into this because you have more plans coming, and none of these plans have, they all sort of tear off the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan in that, they'll use the same mitigations, the same transportation stuff, et cetera. And really, we need a new lens to look at this stuff. None of the plans, one of the things we learned is there was no pace in the plan. Anything could be built at any time, as long as it was within the full window of the plan. The plans need sociology and they need pace. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Eileen Boken, District 4 resident. I'm here to express the solidarity of the West Side with the Eastern neighborhoods and to echo the concerns of the community members who have spoken today, and also their ask that this come before the full board, as this needs, I think, the entire board to become involved in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak on item number 5? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you. I appreciate the participation from the constituents. Thank you for being here. I want to also thank Matt Schneider and Pedro Peterson for your presentation. Thank you. Colleagues, thanks for hearing this item. Supervisor Farrell, you can file this.
Okay. Colleagues, if no other questions or comments, let's entertain a motion to file item number 5.
I'll make a motion to file the hearing.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Tang, second by Supervisor Peskin, and we can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, do we have any other business in front of us?
There's no further business.
Okay, thanks everyone. We are adjourned.
Hey, Keith. If I may come to